You ever notice how the quiet ones in the room almost never reveal their hand, yet everyone feels their presence anyway? It's strange, isn't it? How someone can say so little and still shape the entire atmosphere. And if you've ever found yourself wondering why certain people stay silent, even when they clearly have thoughts, opinions, or emotions simmering beneath the surface, there's usually far more happening internally than anyone realizes. Because silence isn't emptiness. Silence is strategy, defense, observation, restraint, and sometimes an entire emotional biography wrapped in a single behavioral pattern. You can stand right next to someone who barely speaks and still have no clue what worlds they're carrying. That's the part that pulls people in. The mystery is magnetic. And yet, most people stop at the surface level explanation. Oh, they're just shy. But that's rarely the truth. Shyness is one chapter. Quiet people are often living through an entire novel. If you think about it, silence gives someone an advantage most people never even notice they're giving away. When you talk, you reveal your values, your fears, your level of self-control, your impulsiveness, your emotional triggers. But when you stay quiet, you're the only one who keeps the full picture. That alone makes people uncomfortable, curious, or even cautious around you. And that reaction, how others respond to a quiet person, often shapes how that quiet person continues to navigate the world. Take someone who grew up around unpredictable people, maybe parents who reacted harshly to mistakes or environments where speaking up led to conflict. Over time, staying quiet becomes the safest option. It isn't necessarily about confidence. It's conditioning. The mind links silence with survival, and suddenly it becomes second nature. The person may not even realize they're doing it. Silence just feels like home. It's familiar, predictable, controllable. And because they rarely speak impulsively, people around them assume they're simply reserved. But inside, it's more like they're constantly evaluating. Is this moment safe? Is this person trustworthy? Should I reveal this part of myself? Then there's the type who stays quiet because they genuinely prefer to observe. These are the ones who pick up on micro-expressions, tone shifts, power dynamics, and subtle changes in energy long before anyone else does. They notice who interrupts whom, who needs validation, who dominates, who retreats, who lies with confidence, and who tells the truth with trembling hands. Their silence comes from curiosity and awareness. While others rush to talk, they gather information. This is where Machiavelli would probably raise an eyebrow in approval, not because silence is manipulative by nature, but because observation sharpens understanding, and understanding sharpens power. The quiet observer often knows more than they're letting on, and whether they act on that knowledge or simply store it away, it changes how they interact with people. But silence can also come from emotional depth. Some people feel things so intensely that speaking feels like opening a floodgate. They hold back because every sentence carries weight, and they want to choose the right one. They're not trying to hide. They're trying to avoid overwhelming themselves or others. And ironically, that restraint can make them appear cold, unreadable, or distant, when in reality, their inner world is louder than any conversation happening around them. Of course, there's another layer too. Quiet people often understand the value of timing. They don't jump into a conversation just because there's space. They wait until they actually have something meaningful to add. They don't speak on autopilot. They don't need noise to fill the void. This makes their words land differently when they do choose to speak, because you can sense the intention behind them. Even if they disagree with you, they express it calmly, precisely, sometimes even disarmingly. There's a steadiness there, and that steadiness becomes even more interesting when you realize how rare it is. Most people feel uncomfortable with silence. They feel the urge to fill it, to talk through it, to dissolve it with sound. When someone doesn't feed that instinct, it stands out. It's almost like the quiet person is holding a mirror up to everyone else, exposing how uneasy they are with their own thoughts. That alone creates a psychological shift in the room. Suddenly, everyone else is performing, and the quiet person is the one witnessing the performance. But what's fascinating is how often quiet people are misunderstood. Others assume silence means disinterest, when it might actually mean attentiveness. They assume it means weakness, when it could mean restraint. They assume it means lack of ideas, when it might mean too many. Silence becomes this blank canvas that people project their assumptions onto, and that can be both an advantage and a curse. Because while some quiet individuals intentionally cultivate that ambiguity, others are simply trying to navigate the world without drawing too much attention to themselves. Sometimes the motive behind staying quiet shifts depending on the situation. A person can be quiet at work because the environment feels competitive, but loud and expressive among their closest friends. Or they can be quiet in groups, but surprisingly articulate in one-on-one conversations. Silence isn't a fixed trait, it adapts. And understanding why someone goes silent in different environments tells you a lot about what those environments bring out in them. For example, some people stay quiet because they're internally drafting their thoughts before releasing them. Their mind works like an editor that checks for clarity, honesty, and potential consequences before letting anything escape. So while others speak in rough drafts, they speak in polished sentences. And this can create the perception that they're more mature, more thoughtful, or more self-aware, even if internally they feel anything but. It's a kind of self-filtering that can make them appear wiser than they believe themselves to be. Others stay quiet because they've learned that people rarely listen deeply anyway. They've experienced being interrupted, dismissed, or misunderstood so many times that silence feels easier than repeating themselves. It's not that they don't care, it's that they're tired. Communication takes energy, and when you don't see a return on that energy, the mind saves itself by withdrawing. And the moment someone finally notices their quietness, it's usually long after the person has already built emotional distance. Then there are the quiet people, who carry a sense of internal solitude, not loneliness, but a kind of self-contained world where their best thinking happens. They enjoy being present without constantly contributing. They don't measure connection by how much is said. They measure it by how comfortable the silence feels. These are the ones who can sit next to you for an hour without a word and still feel deeply connected. But a lot of quiet individuals share one thing in common. They're incredibly sensitive to energy. They sense tension immediately. They feel emotions in the air, and they often absorb the moods of the people around them. Silence becomes a buffer, a way to regulate themselves so they don't get swept up in everything happening externally. It's their way of staying grounded in environments that pull at them from every direction. And despite how outwardly calm they appear, many quiet people experience a constant internal dialogue. It's not chaotic, it's detailed. They replay conversations to study them. They observe patterns. They anticipate outcomes. They reflect on the deeper meaning of social interactions. Their mind rarely shuts off. It just doesn't always translate that activity into sound. Sometimes they even avoid speaking, because they know once they open up, they might reveal more than they're ready to. Silence gives them control over what stays private. There's also something quietly powerful about people who don't feel the need to announce themselves. Their confidence is subtle, not loud, not performative. They don't chase validation through volume. They don't need to assert dominance to feel secure. And ironically, this often makes others trust them more. They become the people others confide in, lean on, or go to for grounding energy. Their quietness becomes a kind of emotional anchor for the people around them. But here's where things get interesting. Quiet people often possess emotional or intellectual strengths that they themselves underestimate. They might shrug off their ability to read a room in seconds, or to sense when someone's lying, or to notice patterns before others do. Yet this instinctive awareness shapes the way they navigate relationships, conflicts, opportunities, and even dangers. It's why they often make more calculated decisions. It's why they rarely react impulsively. Their quietness forces them to think deeply before moving, a trait that can either protect them or hold them back depending on how they use it. And even though it might not look obvious from the outside, quiet individuals often wrestle internally with when to speak and when to hold back. There's always this tension. Will saying something make this better or worse? Will they misunderstand me? Should I reveal this part of myself? Have I been silent for too long? That constant evaluation can be exhausting, especially when the people around them misread their quietness as indifference. Yet the truth is, quietness is rarely about not having anything to say. It's about how much there is to say and how carefully it's being managed. It's about protecting something, sometimes their peace, sometimes their identity, sometimes their emotional safety, sometimes their sense of control. More than anything, though, the quiet person often sees silence as a tool, a shield, a sanctuary, a form of discipline, a way of studying the world before stepping into it. And the more you understand what drives that silence, the more you realize it isn't small at all. It's not passive. It's not accidental. It's deliberate, thoughtful, and often rooted in deeper psychological patterns than anyone assumes. Now here's where it gets even more revealing, because once you start peeling back the layers of why certain people stay quiet, something unexpected shows up. The silence isn't just about how they protect themselves. It's also about how they move through the world with a different kind of intelligence, one that isn't immediately visible but shapes everything they do. Quiet people navigate life almost like they're tuning an instrument. They adjust, they calibrate, they pick up the subtle vibrations that everyone else steps over because they're too busy talking to notice. And that sensitivity gives them clarity others don't have access to. This is where the psychology of quiet people starts connecting with something deeper, the ability to see beyond surface-level behavior. When someone doesn't feel compelled to jump into every conversation, they gain something most people unintentionally sacrifice: mental space. That space becomes a laboratory for understanding motives, decoding patterns, and processing emotions without being drowned by external noise. Their silence isn't empty, it's full of analysis, and that analysis often reveals things long before others are aware of them. For example, a quiet person may notice the moment someone starts distancing themselves. They hear the slight change in tone. They catch the hesitation others ignore. They sense the micro-reaction behind a forced smile. Because when you speak less, you listen more. And not just listen, you interpret. You translate. You read meaning in the pauses between someone's words. That deeper perception shapes how quiet people approach relationships, opportunities, and especially conflict. Conflict, for a quiet person, is a storm they prefer to weather internally before it ever becomes external. They pre-think the arguments, the consequences, the emotional fallout. They're not running from confrontation, they're studying it, making sure that when they do choose to respond, they're speaking from clarity instead of reaction. It's the opposite of impulsiveness. It's the kind of restraint that Machiavelli would consider a form of power, because a quiet mind is harder to manipulate. But the challenge is that this level of internal processing can create a double edge. On one hand, it leads to strong emotional insight. On the other, it can lead to overthinking. Quiet people often wrestle with mental loops that others don't even realize exist. They replay conversations, scan for hidden meaning, analyze whether they revealed too much, or wonder if they should have said something when they didn't. Silence gives them comfort, but it can also trap them if they're not careful. And because of that, many quiet individuals develop a specific kind of internal tension, the desire to express themselves versus the instinct to hold back. They might have opinions, creativity, humor, even boldness, but it lives in these private pockets until they feel safe enough to show it. And safety for a quiet person isn't about physical danger, it's about emotional permission. They open up when they feel understood, respected, and truly seen. If that's missing, silence becomes armor again, Yet what makes this so fascinating is how silence can shape the impressions others form. People tend to project personalities onto the quiet ones. Sometimes they assume they're wise. Other times they assume they're arrogant. Sometimes they're seen as mysterious, shy, aloof, or even intimidating. And the quiet person rarely corrects these assumptions, because speaking up just to fix an image usually feels pointless to them. So the projections continue, and the person remains undefined in the minds of others. That ambiguity becomes its own kind of psychological power. But power doesn't always mean control over others. Often, it's control over oneself. And quiet people excel at this. They tend to be less reactive, less easily provoked, less eager to prove something, and more self-contained. They don't crumble as quickly under pressure, because their minds are accustomed to operating in stillness. They're used to monitoring their emotional world without broadcasting it. They're used to sitting with discomfort instead of trying to escape it through noise. This internal stability becomes even more noticeable in high-stress environments. While others rush, panic, or speak without thinking, the quiet person typically becomes even more composed. Silence becomes a stabilizer. They slow down the pace of their thoughts, evaluate the situation, and respond with intention. It's not that they don't feel pressure, they feel it intensely, but they've learned how to regulate it from within, instead of outwardly spilling it onto the room. At the same time, quiet people often develop an uncanny sense of personal boundaries. They know what drains them. They know which environments make them shrink. They know when they've had enough stimulation, enough conversation, enough emotional labor. Even if they don't announce those boundaries out loud, they enforce them quietly through withdrawal, limited responses, or gentle distance. It's their way of preserving energy without confrontation, and that energy preservation is crucial, because quiet individuals usually spend far more time in their own heads than the average person. They're constantly reflecting, imagining, analyzing, daydreaming, or processing. Their minds are always active, even when their mouths are not. That constant internal activity can feel fulfilling, but also draining. So they guard their energy with a kind of seriousness that others might misunderstand as aloofness. Still, for all their introspection, many quiet people deal with a very specific kind of frustration. The frustration of not being understood. They hear people say things like, "Why don't you talk more?" Or, "You're so quiet, is something wrong?" As if silence is a malfunction instead of a preference. They get judged for not revealing their thoughts fast enough. They feel overlooked during group discussions, overshadowed by louder personalities who don't necessarily have more insight, just more volume. And that can slowly push quiet people even further inward, reinforcing the idea that being silent is easier than trying to compete for space. But here's something often overlooked. Many quiet individuals have incredibly expressive inner voices. They think in vivid detail. They craft entire conversations in their head that never make it to their lips. They imagine possibilities with depth and nuance. They may be emotionally articulate internally, even if they struggle to translate that into speech. Their silence isn't a lack of expression. It's a different mode of expression. And if you've ever wondered why some quiet people speak so powerfully when they finally choose to share something, it's because their thoughts have been simmering, refining, and sharpening for a long time. By the time they speak, the message has weight. It's distilled. It's intentional. It doesn't wander. It lands. Another thing worth understanding is how quiet people handle trust. They don't give it away easily. Their silence isn't just about comfort. It's a screening mechanism. They observe how people treat others. They pay attention to integrity. They test consistency. They take their time reading someone's character before deciding whether it's safe to open the door a little wider. And when they do trust someone, the depth of that trust is often stronger than what more openly expressive people offer. Because quiet individuals don't bond with everyone. They bond with a few, deeply. That selective connection is why they often make people feel unexpectedly safe. When a quiet person accepts you, listens to you, and becomes present with you, it feels different. It feels sincere. You can sense that they're not performing. They're not seeking attention. They're not speaking to fill the air. Their presence feels intentional, steady, reliable, and sometimes their silence isn't about internal struggle or strategy at all. Sometimes they simply enjoy listening more than talking. They like understanding people. They like hearing stories. They like observing dynamics. They like being part of the environment without being the center of it. There's a certain calmness to that, a certain ease in not having to force anything. Yet the deeper layers of quietness reveal something even more compelling. The real reasons behind a person's silence are rarely singular. They blend. They overlap. One quiet person's silence might come from emotional depth, another's from trauma, another's from observation, another's from preference, and many from a mixture of all of these. And when you finally understand everything that can hide behind silence, you start to see quiet people in a completely different light. Because the truth is, silence is never just silence. It's a pulse, a signal, a story written in invisible ink. And once you learn how to read it, everything changes.